The snow came hard that morning, fast and soundless, turning the world white before the sun could rise. It clung to her eyelashes, buried the tracks behind her, and swallowed the trail ahead. Trees stood like mourners in the gloom, heavy with ice, and the wind whispered through them like a prayer too tired to reach heaven. Her shawl was frozen at the edges, her boots soaked through. One child on her hip, the other dragging behind, lips blue and legs stiff, barely able to lift his feet. She had not spoken in hours. Her voice had gone with the last word she spoke to her husband 3 days before he died. There had been no priest, no marker, just a shallow grave beneath a cottonwood tree that split in two like her heart had done the moment he stopped breathing. She'd buried him alone, wrapped in the last quilt they owned, while the children slept in the wagon with empty stomachs. Now she walked, because the horse was dead, because the wagon wheel snapped on a hidden rock, because the world did not wait for widows with babies and nowhere to go. The girl on her hip moaned weakly. The boy behind her fell again, face first, into the snow. She turned. Her legs shook. She wanted to scream his name, Caleb, but her throat was raw with cold. Instead, she dropped to her knees, hauled him upright, held his face between her palms. His breath came out in shallow clouds. He was 5. His coat didn't fit. It had been his father's, once cut down and resewn with numb hands and crooked seam. "We're close," she whispered, though she didn't know if it was true. "Just a little more." The road, if it could be called, that vanished into a thicket of trees. No sign of life. No fences, no chimneys, no distant dogs barking. Only snow and cold. Her arms ached. Her feet bled. Her back throbbed with every breath. Still she walked. The cowboy first saw them as silhouettes against the white ghost shapes, barely moving. He had come this way looking for strays, lost calves that might wandered off in the storm. The snow muffled his horse's hooves. He might have missed them entirely if not for the shape of the woman's spine, curved like a willow bent in wind, a child on her hip, another clinging to her skirt. He reined in, blinked, then nudged the horse forward. She heard the horse first, thought it was thunder again. Her knees buckled. Her vision spun. The boy slipped from her grasp and crumpled in the snow. Then the horse came into view. She didn't know if it was real. She didn't speak, just stood there, wind tearing at her shawl, mouth open but no sound coming. He dismounted quickly, took in the sight. Woman, late 20s maybe, dressed for October, not for January. Child in arms, barely awake. Boy unconscious or close to it. Her lips were cracked, bleeding. Her eyes looked past him. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I've got a horse. I've got blankets. Let's get your children warm." She nodded, barely. A flicker of something passed across her face, relief, maybe, or disbelief. He handed her his canteen, helped her lower the girl into the saddle. Then he lifted the boy. His face was so pale he could have passed for a doll. Carefully, the cowboy wrapped the boy in a blanket and tucked him against the saddle horn. Then he turned to the woman. "You able to ride?" he asked. She blinked, looked down at her feet, and then back at him. "I can walk," she rasped. He didn't argue, just mounted, pulling the reins gently, careful not to jostle the children. She followed step by step, her eyes locked on the horse like it might disappear if she looked away. The cowboy didn't ask questions. Not yet. He led them west toward a small line cabin tucked against the hills, where a stove waited and beans and a roof that didn't leak. He glanced back once, saw the woman stumble, catch herself, then straighten her spine. Snow fell steady. But now they moved together, horse children, man and woman, through the white silence. The cabin came into view just past midday, a squat, weathered thing crouched between two ridges. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney, the only sign that it still held warmth inside. It wasn't much, but it stood against the wind, and for now that made it sacred. He dismounted and lifted the boy down first light as a sack of flour. The girl stirred and whimpered as he untangled her from the saddle, her tiny fists clinging to the wool blanket. The woman stood back, swaying slightly. Her eyes didn't stray from her son. "Go on inside," he said, quietly nudging the door open. "Stove's going. There's a bed." She moved past him like a ghost, her skirts dragging wet behind her. Inside, the air hit her like a blow, hot, thick with smoke and old beans and sweat. It didn't smell good, but it was warm, and that was enough to bring tears. She knelt beside the bed as he laid the boy down. His small hands were stiff, his eyes still closed. She peeled off his wet coat, rubbing his arms, his chest, trying to coax color back into his cheeks. "His name?" the cowboy asked. "Caleb," she said. Her voice cracked. He nodded. "And her?" "Mercy." He handed her a tin cup of warm water. She pressed it to Caleb's lips. A few drops passed through. She let out a sound that might have been a sob, but it caught in her throat and stayed there. The cowboy crouched by the stove, added more wood, stirred the beans. He didn't ask what happened. Not yet. He just watched as she moved, mechanical, dazed, driven by something older than fear. She was too far gone for panic. What moved her now was grit, plain and worn like an old plow cutting through dry ground. He handed her another blanket, thick and coarse. "You need to get warm," he said. "Both of you." She didn't answer, but she wrapped Mercy in it and held her close. Her arms shook. She rocked just slightly, like she was trying to keep time with something long gone. He turned away, gave her space, and ladled the beans into bowls. When he handed her one, she stared at it like she didn't recognize food anymore. "Eat," he said. She took a bite, chewed, swallowed, ate another. After a while, her face changed just barely. Something softened. She looked up at him, her voice rough. "You got a name?" He nodded. "Levi." She gave a tired nod. "I'm Ruth." They ate in silence. Mercy drifted to sleep in her mother's lap. Caleb stirred once, murmured something, and settled again. Ruth leaned back against the wall. Her hands were raw knuckles, split from cold and use. She looked down at them like she wasn't sure they belonged to her. "Was trying to get to Julesburg," she said after a long while. "Heard there was work. A bakery needed help. My cousin was there once. Years ago." Levi took that in with a quiet nod. He didn't say Julesburg was still 4 days' ride. He didn't say anything about the weather or the odds, or the fact that the land could eat a person whole and never blink. "You're safe here tonight," he said. "Cabin's mine for the winter. I check cattle now and then. No one'll bother you." Her eyes met his. They were gray, not pale, but storm-dark, like something deep had been stirred up and left to settle. She gave a small nod. He cleaned up the bowls. She lay back, both children curled against her sides, and her eyes finally shut. Levi didn't move. He sat by the stove, sharpening his knife, slowly listening to the wind claw at the walls. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the silence deepened. Subscribe and let the West show you what comes next. Ruth woke to stillness. The kind that doesn't come often in winter, not with wind that moans through the eaves and trees that creak like old bones. But this morning the world had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that made her sit up, fast heart-kicking, hand outstretched to find the children. They were still there. Mercy's cheek was against her shoulder, warm and soft. Caleb was turned the other way, one arm flung over her ribs. His breath came slow and even. Still alive. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and dried earth. The fire had burned down to coals, but it hadn't gone out. She stood slowly, knees stiff, feet sore. Levi sat at the table, hat off, shirt sleeves rolled. He was reading a page torn from some old book, squinting as the morning light slipped through the frosted window pane. "You slept a full night," he said, not looking up. "That's something." "I didn't mean to," she said, voice thick. "Doesn't matter. You needed it." She wrapped her shawl tighter. It was still damp near the edges, but the warmth in the cabin had brought some life back into it. Caleb stirred behind her. She turned quickly, knelt beside him. His eyes fluttered open. She cupped his face with her hand. "You're all right," she whispered. He gave a faint nod, then looked around the room. "Where are we?" "A man helped us. His name's Levi." The boy looked at Levi, then back to her, uncertain but calm. "Do we have to go again?" "Not yet." That answer seemed to satisfy him. He tucked his face into the blanket. Ruth rose and moved toward the table. She didn't ask, but Levi poured her a cup of coffee anyway. It was strong and bitter, but it was warm, and it burned her throat in a way that made her feel awake again. "You a rancher?" she asked. Levi scratched his beard. "Some days. Mostly I just keep cattle from freezing to death till spring. You live out here alone." He looked up at her now, eyes steady. "Yes, ma'am. 3 winters now." She nodded slowly, watching the steam rise from her cup. "You?" She didn't answer right away. "Then was married. Samuel died last week." He didn't ask how. She didn't offer. Instead, she looked at her hands again. The skin had split at the joints. She flexed her fingers, then balled them into fists. "I can work," she said. He raised a brow. "I don't need charity. I can cook, sew, patch boots, tend animals, clean." She stood straighter. "You let me earn our keep, we won't be in your way." He didn't smile, but something shifted in his expression. Not pity, more like understanding. "All right," he said. "You can start by helping me bring in wood. Stove eats through it fast in this cold." She nodded once firmly. The next hours passed in quiet labor. Ruth pulled on a too large coat he offered her, his mother's, he said, though he didn't say much more. The sleeves had been hemmed, the lining thick. It smelled like cedar and cold iron. They went outside. Snow had crusted overnight, and her boots cracked through it as they walked. Levi showed her the shed, the stack of logs, the splintered axe leaning against the wall. "You split I carry," she offered. He studied her a moment, then nodded. She took the axe in both hands. Her grip was awkward, her first swing too shallow. But she adjusted, found a rhythm. Her arms trembled, but she didn't stop. He watched in silence, then began hauling the logs inside. When they came back in, cheeks raw with wind and snow melting from their boots, the children were both awake, huddled under the blanket, watching. Caleb's color had come back. Mercy had her thumb in her mouth and her eyes on the stove. Levi made cornbread. Ruth helped, though her hands moved slow. They ate together, then washed up. After, the cabin fell into a peaceful hush. Levi pulled out a small wooden box, whittling tools, and began carving something without looking at it too much. Ruth sat by the stove legs, curled under her Mercy in her lap. There was no talk of tomorrow. Not yet. Just the soft sound of fire, the rasp of wood under blade, and the first fragile sense of something not quite safety but not danger either. It snowed again that night, softer this time, like the sky had tired of punishing the ground. Ruth watched it fall from the window as Levi slept upright in a chair, arms crossed, his hat tipped forward. She should have been asleep too, but the quiet pressed on her chest in a way noise never had. Quiet made space for memory. The wind outside whispered his name, Samuel, and for a moment she saw him again, kneeling beside the wagon, sleeves rolled, grease on his hands from the axle he'd tried to fix with twine and grit. His face had already been too pale, lips tinged, gray eyes dim with fever. He'd lied, said he was fine, said they'd be in Julesburg in 2 days. said it would be all right. She closed her eyes. The ache was different now, not sharp but wide like a field under snow. Still there, just hidden. Mercy stirred against her. Ruth tucked the blanket closer, smoothed the girl's hair. In the morning she went out early. Levi had left his boots by the door, still caked in snow. She slipped them on. They were far too big, but she didn't care. The cold bit hard, but her blood moved quicker now. Her body remembered motion. She took the axe again, split wood until her arms gave out. Then she fetched water from the creek below, breaking the surface with a rock cupping her hands in the icy stream. Her fingers went numb. She didn't stop. When she came back, Levi was up pan-ready frying salt pork and watching her with those unreadable eyes. "You don't slow down much," he said. "I can't afford to." He nodded like that made sense. After breakfast, she asked if there was mending to do. He brought out a bundle of old shirts half torn at the seams and a pair of socks with more hole than cloth. "You sure you want to?" he asked. She didn't answer. Just took the bundle and a tin of pins and got to work. The days settled into rhythm. Caleb gained strength. Mercy stopped crying at night. Ruth started humming to herself without meaning to, low and tuneless, just a sound to keep the air from going stale. Levi mostly kept quiet, but every now and then he said something that made her pause. "You ever ride?" he asked one morning as they stood at the corral watching the gray gelding paw through snow for tufts of grass. "Samuel taught me. I was decent. Before the children. You'll ride again." He said it like it was a fact, not a comfort. That mattered more than she expected. By the end of the week she was riding again, awkward at first, stiff but determined. Levi rode beside her in silence, watching the line of trees pointing out deer trails, old fence lines, places the herd might scatter to. They talked more now. Not much, and never about what hurt. But she learned he'd come west after his brother died, that he'd worked a mine before the cattle, that he liked black coffee and hated noise. He told her about a dog he'd had once and a sister who wrote letters he never answered. She didn't tell him much in return, but her presence spoke enough. The way she took over the cabin like it had always been hers. The way she listened without asking questions. The way her voice softened when she read to the children at night from a torn almanac she'd found in his trunk. Sometimes he watched her when she didn't know at the stove, her hair coming loose, steam rising in the cold light. She moved with purpose, but never ease, as if comfort still felt like trespassing. One night he brought in a small carved figure, an animal, maybe a fox or a coyote. He handed it to Mercy without a word. The girl smiled, shy and small, and curled into Ruth's lap with it clutched in her hand. Later, after the children had gone to sleep, Ruth sat by the fire, thread in her hands, eyes heavy. "Why'd you help us?" she asked. Levi didn't look up from his knife. "Because someone should have." That was all, but it was enough. The thaw came slow. Not a full spring, not yet, but the kind of warmth that seeps up through the soil, softens the snow, makes the air smell faintly of mud and old leaves. The days stretched longer. Birds returned, one or two at first, calling from bare branches like they were testing hope. Ruth began rising before dawn again. Habit, not necessity. She'd walk the ridge near the cabin just to see the sky turn. The wind was still sharp, but the world no longer felt like it wanted to kill her. That mattered. One morning Levi joined her. He didn't say he would, just appeared beside her with a cup of coffee in each hand. They stood in silence, boots sunk into wet earth, steam curling from their mugs as the horizon turned pale gold. "You plan to stay?" he asked. It took her a long while to answer. "I don't know." He nodded once, slow. "The wagon's still busted. Julesburg's near 70 miles. You'd need a team, a cart, more food than I've got." She didn't answer right away. "Then I ain't asking for anything." "I didn't say you were." The wind picked up. The sky went brighter. I keep thinking I'll wake up, she said quietly. That he'll be next to me asking about the road or the axle or if the boy needs boots. That Mercy will be crying for milk and the fire will be out again and I'll be angry with him for something small and stupid. I'd give anything for that. He didn't speak and she was glad. It wasn't always good, she said, but it was real. I know. They stood a little longer and then he said, "You ride better now. Less stiff." She smiled faintly. "Told you I was decent." Back at the cabin, Caleb was outside stacking kindling, his fingers red from cold but working fast. Mercy followed behind him with sticks too small to matter but proud of them all the same. "They're stronger," Levy said. She looked at them, her chest tight with something close to relief. "They're not the only ones." That night, Ruth found a small chest tucked beneath the bed. Levi had said little about his family, only that they were back east, scattered now, none he wrote to. Inside the chest were 2 quilts hand-stitched, worn at the edges. She pulled one out, ran her fingers along the seams, tiny, careful stitches. A woman's hands had done this. A mother's. She laid it over Mercy and Caleb, tucking them in. Levi was outside oiling the saddle. She joined him on the porch. "Your mother made those quilts?" she asked. He nodded. "Told me to take one when I left. I didn't want to. Thought I didn't need it. She did beautiful work." "She did. So do you." She looked at him, startled. He didn't mean the mending. Or maybe he did. Maybe it didn't matter. "I don't know where I belong anymore," she said after a long pause. He stood slow, wiped his hands on a rag. "Belonging's not something you find all at once. It's just the place you stop running." She watched his face. He meant it. Every word. No reach, no promise, no pressure. Just truth, plain as a fence post in winter. Later, when she closed her eyes beside her children, she dreamed not of Samuel but of the ridge at sunrise, of the sharp air and Levi's quiet steadiness, of warmth that asked nothing but still gave, and she wondered if that too could be called love. The break in the weather brought more than birds, and thaw it brought riders. Late one morning Levi spotted them from the ridge, 2 men on horseback, silhouettes against the melting snowpack, moving slow but deliberate. Strangers never came without reason, and reason out here was often trouble. He saddled the gray without a word. Ruth saw the way his jaw set, how he cinched the leather too tight and didn't loosen it. She pulled Mercy close to her side, called Caleb in from where he was kicking at puddles near the barn. "Stay in the cabin," Levy said. "Bolt the door." She nodded, but she didn't like it. She waited till he rode out, then pulled the shotgun from behind the stove and set it near the door. Just in case. The riders came from the west, one tall, one thick through the shoulders, both wearing dust and questions. Levi met them halfway down the slope. "Can I help you?" he asked. The thick one leaned forward in the saddle. "Heard there was a woman and 2 kids up this way. Fitting a description from Julesburg. Man says his sister ran off with his niece and nephew. He wants them back." Levi didn't flinch. "A lot of women in this country. Not many with 2 young uns and a wagon busted in a snowbank." Silence settled in. Levi looked past them toward the hills. "You work for this man. He's got money." "Asked nice." "That don't answer the question." The rider's smile thinned. "We ain't law. But we ain't thieves." "I didn't call you thieves." "Then what are you calling us?" "I'm calling you done here." The riders shifted in their saddles, something quiet tightening between them. "You hiding her?" "I'm standing here," Levi said, voice low. "That ought to tell you enough." The tall one spit into the mud. "She his sister or his wife?" "She's not his anything now," Levi said. The man's face darkened. "You sure you want to get in the middle of this?" Levy's eyes were steady. "I already am." The riders stared him down a moment longer, then pulled the reins and turned slow and angry. They didn't rush off, just left dust behind them and the taste of something sour in the air. Levi waited until they were far enough gone to be shadows again. Then he turned back. Ruth met him halfway to the cabin. "I heard," she said. He looked at her. "You want to tell me who they were?" She looked past him toward the trees. "Samuel had a brother. Never liked me. Thought I dragged Samuel down. When he heard we were leaving for Julesburg, he said it was selfish. Said I was killing my children for pride. Maybe he sent them. I don't know. You want to go back?" Her head snapped around. "No. You sure?" Yes. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from anger. From the fight in her that hadn't died, not even in the snow. "They might come back," Levi said. "I'll be ready." They stood close now, the wind around them warm for once. "You don't owe me anything," she said. He looked at her, slow and steady. "I know," he said. "That's why it means something." She swallowed hard. "If we stay." "If you stay, you don't owe me anything then either." But he looked at her in a way that said he hoped she would. That night Caleb asked if they'd move on soon. Ruth tucked him in and said no, not yet. Then she sat by the fire while Levi carved wood in silence, and for the first time in a long time she let herself believe there might be more days ahead than behind. Outside, the land began to soften. Inside, the pieces of a life were quietly, steadily coming together. Spring showed itself in sudden ways, the snap of ice giving beneath Ruth's boot, the first green blades slicing through snow, the sound of creek water finally running loose again. Inside the cabin, Mercy laughed out loud, chasing a moth, her voice high and strange to their ears after so much silence. Caleb could lift the axe now, though he still swung it too wide. Levi taught him how to stand feet apart, hands firm. Ruth watched them through the open door, mending Levi's coat by the fire. She didn't speak, just listened to the rhythm of their voices, quiet, spare, full of that plain trust men pass down when the world gives them a task and not much else. She'd stopped waiting for Samuel in her sleep. The dreams still came, but less sharp now. They didn't hollow her out the way they used to. Grief had settled into a quieter corner of her, like old pain after a long ride, still there, but not unlivable. Levi came in boots thick with mud, face streaked with trail dust. He took off his hat and set it on the peg by the door. Then he looked at her like he had something to say but didn't know how. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded once. "Riders won't be back. I saw tracks. They turned south. Looks like they took the road back toward Cheyenne." She let out a slow breath. Not relief exactly, just the release of one more held breath in a long line of them. "I've been thinking," he said. "Come fall, I'll need help with the cattle drive. It's 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'd pay you." Her brow lifted. "Man, you can ride. You've got sense. I trust you. And you said you wanted work, not charity?" She nodded slowly. "What about the children? Tom Abernathy's wife takes in kids during branding. She'd look after them. She's kind. Has 2 girls of her own." Ruth didn't speak for a moment. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "You really think I could handle it?" "I wouldn't ask if I didn't." There it was again, that way he had of saying a thing like it wasn't up for debate. Not because he was hard, but because he meant it. She smiled faintly. "Then I'll do it." Weeks passed. The land turned soft and bright. Yellow flowers crawled across the hills. The children grew louder, stronger, more themselves. Caleb made friends in town. Mercy followed him like a shadow. Levi built a pen for chickens. Ruth helped him measure the posts, drive them deep. They worked side by side, sun on their backs, dirt in their boots, arms brushing, sometimes accidental but not unwelcome. One evening after supper he handed her a small box wrapped in oilcloth. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a silver ring, simple, worn, the surface dulled by time. She turned it in her fingers. "It was my mother's," he said. "She gave it to me before I left. Told me to give it to someone if I ever found a place worth staying." She looked up at him, eyes wide, unsure. "I'm not asking anything right now," he said gently. "I just want you to have it. If it ever feels right, you can wear it." Her fingers closed around the ring, and she didn't say anything, but her eyes glistened and her throat moved like she was swallowing something heavy. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned low, she slipped the ring onto her finger, not because she was ready to start again, but because for the first time she wasn't afraid to try. Summer came fast, like it had been waiting just over the ridge. Heat baked the earth dry, and the air smelled of pine horses and sun-warmed dust. The grass turned gold. Water ran slower. Ruth woke each morning before the light, pulled her boots on, and got to work without needing to ask what needed doing. The rhythm came easy now. Her body had changed, leaner, stronger. Her hands were calloused arms, more sure. There was no softness left in her out of necessity, but there was peace. The cattle drive loomed like a shadow in the distance, and Levi began preparing her. They rode together each morning, further now, checking fence lines and watering holes. He taught her how to keep an eye on the herd, how to read weather off the wind. She listened, absorbed, never asked him to repeat himself. He showed her how to sleep light and keep a hand on the reins, how to tie a calf rope one-handed, how to tell if another rider meant trouble without waiting for him to draw. He never spoke to her like she was delicate. She never acted like she needed saving. They were equals on the trail. Most days they didn't talk much, just rode and watched the land unroll in front of them. But sometimes on the quieter rides he told her about growing up near the Pecos, his father's hands stained with dye from the tannery, his sister who ran off to teach in Kansas. And sometimes she told him about her mother's hymns, about the first time Samuel held Caleb, how afraid she'd been the night Mercy came early in the back of a wagon, with only cold water and a dull knife to guide her. There were things they didn't say, but between the words something built itself, steady, patient waiting. One night as July softened into August, Ruth found Levi out by the corral, staring up at the stars, like they held some answer he hadn't quite figured out yet. She walked to him slow. "Can't sleep." He shook his head. "Thinking about..." He turned toward her. "I keep wondering if I'm the kind of man who builds a life or just keeps folks safe until they find a better one." She didn't blink. "You're the first man I've ever known who didn't ask for anything he wouldn't give." He looked at her and for once didn't look away. "I'd like to build something with you," he said, "if you'd want that." Her heart pounded, but she didn't step back, didn't hide from the weight of it. "I want something steady," she said. "Not loud, not perfect, just real." "This is real," he said. "All of it." She nodded once, slow, then stepped close and laid her hand in his. They stood that way in the dark, two people shaped by hardship, made rough by the world but not ruined. The wind blew warm around them and the horses snorted in their sleep. Later that week Ruth rode out with the cattle. 3 weeks on the trail, dust in her mouth, rope burns on her hands. She rode hard, led strong, held her own. At night she sat by the fire with the other hands, quiet but respected. When she returned, sun-dark and weary, the children ran to her screaming, and Levi met her with that quiet smile she'd come to trust. By harvest she wore the ring every day, not to mark what had passed but what was coming. They didn't call it marriage, not yet. But she stayed. He made room. And together they began to build a life with no promises but the ones made daily in labor, in laughter, in showing up through dust and snow. That winter the cabin held more than survival. It held warmth and voices and a steady fire. And in the spring, when the first shoots broke through the thawing earth, Ruth stood barefoot in the mud, with Mercy on her hip and Caleb at her side, watching Levi plant fence posts into ground they now called home. She was no longer lost. He was no longer waiting. And the land, harsh as it was, gave them this a place to begin again. Another dawn waits ahead. Subscribe to see it.